Hi, everybody. I'm Tom Chapman. I am the CEO of Peeq Pro. Peeq Pro is a company that believes that people need to clean their eyelids more. Eyelids are gross, and we don't talk enough about it. As we have spent the last couple of years working with optometrists and other eye professionals, one of the things that consistently comes up is questions about cosmetics, makeup, and other things that people want to put around their eyes. So tonight we have an expert with us, Dr. Selina McGee from Oklahoma. She has written, I've read at least 6 articles by her. There could be more that talk either about cosmetics or about dry eye. So most of our conversation is going to be directed towards those issues tonight. She practices in Oklahoma, where she grew up and went to optometry school, but she has hopefully a couple funny stories that involve kind of her journey into optometry. So with that, I'm going to hand off to Selina and just say, Dr. McGee, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into optometry.
Sure. So like you said, I am from Oklahoma, and I had zero desire to stay in Oklahoma. I was going to, get out of the Midwest and do something, very exotic and move to the East Coast in a big city. I grew up in a small town. I had 18 people in my high school class at graduation, if that tells you how tiny that is. And I knew I wanted to do something in healthcare, but I wasn't really sure exactly what. And it just so happened that I spent a summer on the East Coast. My brother was living there at the time, and my parents were like, okay, you can go, but you have to, find a good job, and you're not going to just like lounge around all summer, right? And this is a funny story. So I drove my car up there 3,000 miles, however many days that took, and found a job in a very weird way because I was desperate to find something. They gave me like 2 weeks to find something. And back then there was no internet. You went through the classifieds circled in your red and, all the things. And so I wore glasses and contacts since I was 10. And I was looking through the classifieds, and there was a position for a technician in an optometry office. And I was like, I can put in contacts, right? I bet I can do this. I'm going to tell these people that I want to be an optometrist. I had no desire to be an optometrist, but I'm going to tell them that because then they'll be more likely to hire me, right? And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. And I stumbled into this profession, and I fell in love with it literally almost from day one. And so at the time I was attending a different school. The 2 optometrists were like, you have the best school in the country. And I said, we don't have the best in anything in Oklahoma. And they were like, no, we promise. And I did my research, and sure enough. And so I knew this is what I wanted to do. I was 19. I had never been to Tahlequah. I applied to NSU to finish my undergrad there because I hoped that I would be able to get into optometry school earlier if I did that. So I applied to go to school 2 weeks before school started, got accepted, and drove my car through Tahlequah, found an apartment 2 days before school started, dropped all my stuff off, and my parents drove back with it, and started my sophomore year of undergrad at NSU. Waited tables for a semester, got on at the optometry school as a student worker, which can go either way. There's plenty of students that have done that never got into optometry school because they made somebody mad, or you had a green light and they asked you to apply early, which is what happened to me, thankfully. And so then I started optometry school there at the ripe old age of 20 and graduated at 24. And then I left optometry school, and it was like, great, I can do lasers and I can do surgical procedures. This is awesome. I'm going somewhere to like start my dream. And the only place I can do that is Oklahoma. And so here I am 20 plus years later in Oklahoma because it's the most amazing place to practice. So that was my journey.
It's pretty fun. I mean, I am not sure everybody on the call is familiar with the differences in Oklahoma compared to pretty much everywhere else. Could you talk a little bit about that, and particularly how it shapes your practice, which is, I think,
Sure.
a little different?
And here's the background too. So it's really important, and I wear a legislative hat. So, and I think some people know this about me, but not everybody knows this about me. So when I left optometry school in 2002, we had laser in Oklahoma since 1988. And then in 1998, people started getting fussy with us namely the medical, the ophthalmologist in Oklahoma, of is this within the scope of practice? How are they able to do this? And so in 1998, we went back to the legislators and passed a new bill that said, yes, this is within our scope of practice. And then we kind of had to fight that until 2002. And then we sealed at that point all of our surgical privileges and our laser privileges, even though we'd been doing that since 1988. So Oklahoma was very fortunate to have some very forward-thinking optometrists that wrote our laws in an exclusionary way. So I was fortunate enough to be exposed to that from day one. And whenever I left optometry school, I obviously stayed in Oklahoma, and now I serve on our board of examiners. So, we do have a very broad scope of practice, and it's exclusionary, and that's intentional. And so if any of you are on the call and you serve on your legislative committee, or you're involved, and you should be, we all should be highly involved with our state committees and our state legislation, because that's the only way that you get to practice the way that we get to practice in Oklahoma. And so, a prime example is I see patients now Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays. I'm consulting and lecturing and doing things across the country Thursdays and Fridays. My schedule on Monday is, patients 8 to 5, primary care mixed in with IPL, radio frequency. Tuesdays, I'm doing lasers at the surgery center at lunch. And Wednesdays are devoted to procedures, including things like neurotoxin, laser resurfacing, IPL, RF, lots of dry eye things. And so that's the way that I think optometry should be practiced, because we all have a very special skill set. And I would encourage you, if you're not involved, get involved, stay involved. But it's really important for the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years for what optometry is. And look at what's happened. I mean, the domino has certainly fallen. We were the only state to do all those things for many years. Kentucky got it in 2010. Louisiana was right behind it, and now South Dakota just passed their law. So where we had used to, one state per decade, now we have typically 2 to 3 states per year that get their expanded scope and their expanded privileges. So it's a fun time to be an optometrist.
So I am guessing that the doctors on the call are sort of salivating at all the things that you just said, both in terms of your scope of practice, but also you listed about 5 different things that you're doing. At least some of those things are not things that most offices do. So rather than me going through and saying, like, tell us about your IPL practice, why do you use an RF? Is that a cosmetic? Do you want to talk a little bit more in detail about some of the things that you do when somebody walks in with dry eye, and then how that extends into cosmetics?
Yes. And that's how I got into, so I have a very dry eye focused practice. And that's how I even got into aesthetics and cosmetics, because I started to pull this dry eye thread. And once you start to pull it, you realize they're all so intertwined. And I've really, I think, blurred the lines well of what that looks like. And I was fortunate enough to fall in love with dry eye when I was in my externship, because I worked in a really large LASIK center cataract surgery practice where we created a ton of very bad dry eye. And we had no tools. We had preservative-free tears, steroids, ponto plugs. That was it. And so to watch this journey over the last 2 decades become what it is now is nothing I ever really dreamed of. I just wanted to help people in a way that they'd never been helped before. And so it started very much as a dry eye clinic, and it still is. So my day-to-day, I think the most important thing is my mindset, as every patient has dry eye until they prove that they don't. So I approach it exactly like how we treat glaucoma. We walk into an exam room and that patient proves that they don't have glaucoma because we're doing IOP, we're looking at optic nerve, we're looking at visual fields. Those are things that we would never dream of not doing on any patient. That is standard of care. When we think about a dry eye patient, the standard of care is not consistent in the way that I believe it should be. So mindset is number one. Patients have dry eye until they prove that they don't. And the prevalence is so much higher than glaucoma. I mean, we did about, We look at cataract surgery, about 4 million cataracts last year. Glaucoma patients are around 3 million. Only about 1.5 million are being treated because the other 1.5 million don't know they have it. Dry eye is in the 50 million. So it's much more common, much more prevalent. So I think the systems that you have in place are really important. So in our clinic, on every primary care patient, they fill out a speed questionnaire, which is several questions that they look at to see, are they symptomatic for dry disease? And that's done before I ever walk into the room. If they meet a certain criteria, which in our clinic, it's 6 or greater out of 28, then I have automatic standing orders to do point of care testing, including osmolarity and including MMP9. And I like having those two things because osmolarity measures evaporation rates. We know the salt content of the tears. It tells me where we are, mild, moderate to severe. Inflammatory and MMP9 tells us how much inflammation we have on board. And I need that test. So in the absence of dry disease, which osmolarity, if it's normal, but I have a positive MMP9, then it tells me I don't have dry eye. I have conjunctival, or I have EBMD, or I have some other mechanism that is causing inflammation. It's not dry. And that's important because the symptoms are exactly the same. So that's how we approach patients up to that point. And then when I come into the room, I have all of that data. I put dye in every single patient. So I use just fluorescein. I used to use fluorescein and lissamine, but lissamine's pretty messy. And then there's times I can't get it. It's back ordered. And so I've used now a Ratten filter to assess fluorescein on patients. And you can see a multitude of things with a Ratten filter and sodium fluorescein. And then after we are looking at vital dye, which that needs to set for about 1.5 minutes before you assess tear breakup time and you assess staining. Otherwise, you don't have enough time to let it sit there. So while all that's happening, then I'm looking at eyelids. And this is where that thread starts to pull, right? So I have patients look down so that I can see what's happening at the base of their lashes. I can see if they've got eyelash extensions on, how clean the base of their lashes. I'm looking for Demodex blepharitis and all the things that go along with that. I'm looking for old makeup. Are they getting it off? Do they have blepharopigmentation? Have they decided, to tattoo their eyeliner on in a desperate attempt to help themselves? So that's all done as I'm waiting on the dye. And then the second thing I do is I push on my Bohemian glands, which is really important. And we want to know the function. Back to the glaucoma analogy of structure and function. I can do mammography all day long and look at structure. It doesn't tell me anything. I need to know if it's functioning. And so those 3 things to set up a dry eye clinic are all you need. A good questionnaire, vital dye, and your digits to push on, and then your mindset. So that's how we approach dry eye. And now you can kind of see where those conversations just start to develop naturally, because you're looking at eyelids. You're talking about how do you take your makeup off? I see some things here that concern me. You're putting your eyeliner on top of your meibomian glands. I see a lot of debris in your tear film. It looks like you're not getting your makeup off completely. Walk me through how you take your makeup off. What kind of products do you use? Did you know that lots of the things that we use around our eyes are not safe? Do you know the ingredients that you're looking for? Those are all things that you can, start to develop on your own and get comfortable with so that you suss out that information.
There's a ton there. So
yeah,
so you answered 3 questions we get a lot. So I'm going to talk just for 2 seconds about Peeq so it makes a little bit more contextual context. We work with about 150 offices. And one of the number 1 questions we get when we have a prospect is, how do I start doing dry eye treatments? So I just wanted to applaud you because you really said it very clearly in like 1, 2, 3 without, you need to go spend $400,000 worth of equipment, which is the biggest fear that I think most doctors have. So I wanted to say thank you, number 1. And then you talked a little bit about some of the tests. And I want to make sure that I don't miss a doctor question. So I'm just going to ask the audience whether was there confusion or things on that protocol of examining that you would want to know a little bit more. Because otherwise, I'm going to move to the next question I have, which is a little bit more targeted at some of the other things you said. So I'm going to ask first. Cheryl says it was clear, so trust my wife.
Perfect.
Anybody else want to ask any questions? Everybody feel good about where we are? Okay. So you mentioned one thing that I don't think a lot of doctors think about, which is what are the ingredients that are in common cosmetics that people are putting around the eyes. And in particular, you know, one of the things I love about a couple of articles that you wrote are, here's 8 or 9 things that if it's in this ingredient, you should just be able to hand to your patient and be like, these are bad.
Yep.
Like, try to avoid these things.
Yep.
How did you find that? How did you go through the process of just sort of, you know, building that expertise?
So PubMed and I are good friends. And that, I mean, that's, I look for studies looking at this. And then I had the opportunity to be on the TFOS lifestyle workshop, which was published a year ago in May. And I was on the subcommittee for cosmetics. So we literally, it was myself and 11 other doctors around the world who we spent 2 years taking a deep dive into what is in the literature that we can find that we know is bad, that we can say definitively, this cannot be in your ingredients. We, you know, there's some questioning things of, I kind of think of it like red, yellow, green. You know, red is definitely no, yellow, we just don't know. And then green, as far as we know, based on the literature, there's nothing in here that's going to cause a problem. So that's kind of how we approach it. But that's how I got into this very deeply, was spending time putting that paper together. So that's a great resource for everybody on the call, is to pull that cosmetics subcommittee. It was published in Ocular Surface Disease last May. And I think it's about 40 pages with, I don't remember how many references, a lot, but that's a good place to start, because that will give you the ingredients of absolutely not, many of which I can't even pronounce. And then it will give you, these are the things that we know, and here are the places that we still need a ton of research.
So I'll track down that article for those of you. I've already gotten 2 people chat me privately and say, will you give us the reference page? So we will send it to anybody that registered. If you listen to this after and you want that, please just email us and we'll make sure you get basically a link to the article. One of the things that you talked a little bit about also was, you were talking about somebody walks in and they're not getting their makeup off well.
Yeah.
I don't want to prescribe the answer to this question, but I'm really curious how you train people who do a bad job. And part of the reason I say that is, again, when we go out and talk to offices, it's very common that somebody will be like, eyelids are gross. People never get them clean. Like, their current way of doing it is inadequate, regardless of what that process is. They're just not doing a good job. So how does your office train? Is that you? Is that a technician? What does that process look like?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And there's a lot of opportunity here, because we have done a very poor job in eye care about this. And it's no one's fault but our own. And I completely own that. We've never talked about how to clean your eyelids, that this should be part of your daily visual hygiene. Very much so, just like you go to the dentist. No one leaves the dentist without being told they need to floss and brush their teeth twice a day, and here's how to do that. And we have to incorporate that into our practices. And we just haven't, for whatever reasons. And so now we have an entrance questionnaire that walks through, like, it asks a lot of different questions, dry eye questions, rosacea questions, like, you know, does your skin flush after eating certain kinds of food? Are you susceptible to sun? Do you blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of different questions on there about that. And then there's a couple of questions about eyelashes and lids. And then there's one about, do you use any kind of eyelash serum? So they're already kind of prepped for, oh, there's going to be some questions here before I even walk in the room. And then when I'm behind the microscope, I talk all the time. Like, I talk to patients all the way straight through. There's no silence in the room when I'm doing an exam. And I learned that a long time ago from patients, that they really respected that. And it was a huge practice builder for me years ago. And I just never lost it. And I've honed it. So when I'm behind the microscope talking to patients, I will talk about, this is what I'm seeing and here's what I'm looking for. And I actually start with the skin, and I remind patients, listen, your skin on your eyes is 0.5 millimeter thinner than anywhere else on the body. It's affected differently by a lot of things, including the sun, for one. When was the last time you put sunscreen there? And they're like, oh, never. Exactly right. And so if you don't wear good ophthalmic sunglasses, you're highly susceptible to skin cancer. And it also happens to be the most common place in the body to get skin cancer. So there's step number one. And they're shocked, right? And as they should be, because they've never heard that before. And then we talk about, when you're taking off, how do you wash your eyes? How do you wash your lids? Walk me through that. And a lot of times I let water run on it in the shower. That's one answer I get often. And then, I had a patient today. I asked her how she took her makeup off, and she said, oh, I really like, and I won't call the company out, but she said, I really like those so-and-so's wipes that are in a little package. And I was like, okay, so let me tell you some things about what's happening in there. Anything that's in a package that stays wet has to be loaded with preservatives, because it's just going to grow bacteria and fungus if it's not. And so this particular one is loaded with BAK. And we all know what BAK does to the ocular surface. And that is one of the big no-nos, is BAK. And so this particular product has about 1,000 times greater concentration of BAK than even what's in our eye drops. And we know that the detriment to that. So that's something that she has no idea. So if you're going to do some kind of wipe like that, they have to be individually wrapped. And it's not my preference. And so I had an opportunity to say, great, here's a micellar cleanser that I like. It doesn't have any naughty ingredients. It's not going to strip away all the good things, but it's going to remove what we want it to remove. So that's one way to just tuck it into the conversation. And that's my goal, is for you guys not to go in tomorrow and try to reinvent everything that you do. It's finding those moments that you can just ask a question in a different way, or have someone alongside you ask a question in a different way, and then give yourself the opportunity to educate in that moment. I don't want you to try to do too many things at once, because that's where I see doctors get frustrated, and then the things they want to do, they can't implement. We've all done that, right? Gone to a meeting over the weekend. Oh, we're so excited. Get to work on Monday and 30 patients deep. And it's like, yeah, well, that's never going to happen, because I try to do too many things at once. And my team and I were not ready to implement this. So try to find little ways to do that. And that conversation, just in that eyelid conversation, is that's what I would start with. Own that and get really good at that, and then move on to the next thing. But that's how we talk about cosmetics and how to even just take it off.
Can I ask, I want to ask 3 questions all at once. So I'm going to kind of stack them up.
Okay.
So I read, this is probably not something I want on tape, but I'm going to say it anyways. I read Allure, InStyle, Cosmo about makeup removal. And it feels to me, and again, I would like you to comment on this, because I'm happy if you say you're dumb. That is not true. It feels to me like generally in the places that my daughters would be reading about how to take off their makeup, they're talking about makeup removal, but not necessarily cleaning. So I would describe it as taking mascara off without ever putting soap on there for if you were looking at an equivalent. Am I way off? Does that feel sort of directionally right? So I'll give you an example. I read an article from Allure last week, and it came out last spring, and it said, use micellar water, brush it on with a spoolie, and then rinse it off. That's how you clean your eyelids. And what I had been taught was you also need something that's going to help with Demodex mites. You also need, potentially some products that might help with inflammation or things of that nature. So right. I'm curious after hearing you say that, after hearing how you talk to your patients, do you go into any of that depth? Do you kind of leave it to directionally, they're sort of directionally closer to where they need to be? I'm just curious how you do it.
No, we're pretty specific, and it depends on the patient. I mean, if they tell me that they're using a bar of soap, then we are talking about that. You have to be careful, but this conversation can get convoluted real fast.
Yep.
And so
Just
you
look at
have
my
to,
question.
yeah, I mean, and so you're right. You don't want to use soap because that has a ton of surfactants, which are stripping everything away that in this 0.5 millimeter thinner skin. And once you break that skin barrier, now you set up a whole other set of problems. And so I you're right, it's not soap. There's oil-based cleansers, there's water-based cleansers. I don't like anything oil-based because it winds up on the ocular surface. The reason I don't like, waterproof mascara is because typically you have to use oil-based cleansers to get it off. But now we have a couple of products where that's no longer the case. Micellar water, the way it works is it uses micelles to surround the molecule of dirt, grime, makeup, whatever it is, and then it gets rinsed away because the micelle is encapsulated it and it pulls that off with it. But it stays on the skin because that micelle now, and if there's surfactants in that, then it's going to stay and it may cause a problem on that skin barrier. So you have to know your products and you have to know what else is in there besides just the micelle. There's a new one that has come out that's ionized water that's even a level above micelles. So the way that it works is because it's ionized, it's looking for those negatively charged particles to attract, and then it pulls that with it when you use your cotton ball to take that off. But it's not stripping, and it has the least amount of surfactants of anything that's on the market.
Interesting.
So those are the things that you look for, and I am a huge proponent of carrying whatever you're going to carry in the office so that you can hit the easy button. Because when you go into an exam room, you have a 7 to 10 minutes of finite time. You need to be able to hit the easy button of, this is what I have researched, this is what I know, I've done the homework for you, and here's what's available. This is causing a problem and I want you to use this instead. Because that's what patients want to know. All they want to know is, okay, great, just tell me what to buy. And so that's what I do is I carry it in the office and allow patients to purchase that. Is that always me discussing it? No, because it might be the scribe that's with me. It might be my ocular hygienist who is going over their dry eye therapy. And oh, by the way, Dr. McGee wanted me to talk about these two things. It might be the optician because that's who they check out with and they have a question. It might be my checkout person who also, you have to educate everybody in the office because these questions are going to come and filter through everyone there. The last thing you want to give someone is the confidence that anybody on your team doesn't know what you're talking about. So yeah, it's not soap, and you don't really wash your eyes. You can use a lot of products that actually stay on the skin.
That makes sense. I'm going to change gears a little bit and talk about false eyelashes. Do you see a lot of people coming in with false eyelashes?
So we do have we have a lot of patients that have extensions, and there's different types of false eyelashes, and we get this question a lot because people don't know how to handle them. So when you're looking at different things, and I always have a good, better, or best. So best is no extensions whatsoever. Better is, okay, let's put lashes on, but they're false lashes that go on with glue that don't contain latex or formaldehyde because they come off every night. And then third is, okay, you can wear extensions, but here's the caveats you need to understand, and here's how we're going to clean them, and here's all the things you need to know about them. And sometimes patients will give them up and sometimes they won't, but at least I can educate on how to clean them, because a lot of times they are told, no, you can't clean them, don't wash them because you're going to mess with the glue, right? That's the big fear, because these things are expensive to put on and they don't want to do anything that would detrimentally affect the glue or where they would come off too soon. They're putting them on again every 4 to 6 weeks, right? Depending on how fast the lash grows. You're utilizing glue solvents to take all of that back off and then put it back on. So the glue solvents are sometimes the biggest culprit of what's toxic to the front surface, because they're sitting there for 2 to 4 hours while they're putting these things on and then taking them off. So for eyelash extensions, the conversation is, here's what you're at risk for. I would say 99% of patients with eyelash extensions also have Demodex blepharitis. You can, in fact, treat Demodex blepharitis with lotilaner 0.25%. It doesn't mess with the glue. I have a couple of case reports that are getting ready to get published. You guys will be the first to hear that, but look for that in the literature in the next 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and you'll see those case reports because they're going to have Demodex. So, and then the other part is the way I like to clean them is you need that mechanical like movement. So they need to actually clean them and utilize, I like a micellar water for that. It won't mess with the glue or the ionized water, either of those. And then I like hypochlorous spray as well, because at least we've got bacteria covered when we utilize that. And I like that twice a day. So we just have a very regimented way of caring for them, and then they understand the repercussions of leaving them on. Now, if patients choose to take them off, which they often will, but there's a psychological component to taking them off because they're on there for a reason. The patient likes the way they look, or they didn't like the way they looked before, and now you're asking them to look different, which they don't like, and it destroys their natural lash, which can take months for that to come back. And so I like to offer a lash serum that doesn't have a prostaglandin in it, so that we have those polypeptides and are able to keep their natural lash longer for a longer amount of time. Because remember, the lashes live anywhere from 4 to 11 months. The better condition that lash is in, the longer it's going to stay. And so I think just, coaching people through that and giving them a tool to utilize to help the natural lash make a comeback, I think is helpful for the psyche.
I'm going to pause and just ask if there are questions. You have been really great. I mean, just lots of stuff that people don't talk about. So I want to go on record as saying thank you, because this is a hard conversation that a lot of doctors don't want to have. And then if they do, they're like, "Wow, eyelids are gross, wash them." So
yeah,
you've gone into great detail. Are there any questions from the audience?
And I think it's good while you guys are thinking, because I have a lot of docs who are like, well, you're female, like this is a much easier conversation for you to have. And I do think it does make the conversation more comfortable, but just because you're male doesn't mean you can't have these conversations and your patients aren't going to want to hear the information. And one of my close friends and colleagues, who is a very gifted optometrist, runs a really big dry eye practice. He and I did a lecture together, and he learned a lot going through this lecture with me. And he started doing some things in his clinic and asking his patients, and he started talking about makeup, something that he was never comfortable with. And he will tell you that it is a complete game changer. And patients are very happy that he brought it up. And then they just fire away with like 10 more questions. So I think on the front end, these conversations can be very intimidating. But I'm hoping that I'm giving you tools so that they're no longer intimidating.
As somebody who is male and who has these conversations regularly and I'm not a makeup wearer, not an expert at makeup, I'm surprised at how often offices simply duck the conversation because it starts too awkwardly, as opposed to starting with some simple stuff. One of the things that we talk about is just the equivalency of washing your eyelids to brushing your teeth. And we'll ask the question of teams. We'll say, how many of you brushed your teeth today? Everybody raises their hand. And then we'll say, how many of you washed your eyelids? And it's about 30 to 40%. So 60% of the people in the clinic typically are not washing their lids every day. And it gets really hard, to your point, if you don't have advocates and testimonials from the staff about their own process, workflow, etc. It gets really hard for you to be able to convince your patients, oh, this is really a meaningful thing. So I do think it isn't just about talking to the patient. It's about establishing that care regimen. We do have a question. The question is, how much experience does she have with lotilaner? And then how long does the Demodex stay away after using it?
Great question. So, and full disclosure, I am a consultant for Tarsus. I want to put that out there. So I have probably, I don't know, close to maybe 120 patients that I've treated with lotilaner. So I have a fair number of experience with it. And when you look at they've done some long-term data at a year. I've had patients that I treated starting in August that I'm still, so August, September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April. So I've got patients that have been on it for, like, they've been treated and I've seen them back around 8 months. It's going to vary from person to person. And it depends on their dry eye condition. It depends on their skin type. It all just depends. So what I will tell you is I treat patients with lotilaner. I start them off BID. On label, it's for 6 weeks. I extend it a week because that bottle is overfilled. So I leave patients, I just have them use the full bottle for the first round. And I've had a handful of patients that did need retreatment. And it was very different for everybody. I had one patient that she needed retreated at 6 weeks. And I think for her, I didn't treat everything completely. And then I've had some patients that I didn't need to retreat them for 6 months. And then I've had lots of patients that I haven't had to retreat at all. And so just lay the groundwork when you're talking to patients. I have a therapy that's BID for 6 weeks or 7 weeks, whatever you're going to do, that kills the mite, which is the underlying problem here. And we're just going to reassess periodically to see, are you going to have a rebloom of this because of just the way that your system is built? Some people are just more prone to these. And it's not anything you're doing. It's not a lid hygiene problem. It's literally your skin type, and skin types, one, are very susceptible. If you're fair skin, blue eyed, red hair, you're going to probably have Demodex blepharitis, and you're going to have to manage it. But that being said, it doesn't make me shy away from using the therapy, because for the first time we have something that's truly democidal in a short amount of time. But that's how I set patients up for success. I don't make promises I can't deliver on, that this is a one and done cure for the rest of their life, because I can't confidently say that, because there's a likelihood it's going to come back. So I think it's a great question. Just set yourself up for success in the way that you talk to patients about it.
So there are a couple other questions, but there was some follow-up to that question. So I'm going to kind of jump ahead of the questions. Sorry if you're in line. Do you have problems with prior auths? Is it covered well by insurance? Have you had any negative reactions?
Yes. So you have to be very specific on your pharmacy, and there's only 4 pharmacies that can fill this. I send everything through BlinkRx, which is an online mail order pharmacy based out of Boise, Idaho. If you try to send this to Walgreens or CVS, forget it. It's not going to happen. You might get a prior authorization. What you need to know about a prior authorization is if they have any kind of step therapy or anything on there, all you have to do is put one sentence: this is the only FDA approved medication for Demodex blepharitis, period. That should get you through any kind of prior authorization, because there's nothing else that exists that can treat this. So those are my 2 pearls. You're going to get a prior authorization. There's your sentence: only use BlinkRx. Or there's a couple of other pharmacies. Ask your XDMV rep who they recommend. There's 4 pharmacies I know that they partnered with. I have never had a patient pay more than $50. It'll either be $0 or $50 because of the programs they have in place.
Great. So another question that I think is probably a relatively easy, straightforward question is, can we have access to the questions she asks in addition to the speed questions?
Yeah, so the speed questionnaire you can download. It's a PDF. If you just type in speed dry eye, you're going to be able to download that right now. The questions that I ask, I can send to Thomas so that you guys can take that and kind of run with it.
Cool. All right, I'm gonna move a little bit down a path. So this is gonna be choose your own adventure, Dr. McGee. So
okay.
Would you rather talk a little bit about how you shifted your practice to have more sort of cash pay processes? So you talked about the IPL, you talked about RF, you talked about a couple other things earlier. Or would you rather talk about products that you love, particularly cosmetic and aesthetic products that you have in your office?
I think let's go, because we've kind of talked a lot about cosmetic. I think let's pivot and let's do let's do energy-based devices.
Great.
Um,
So what
Yeah.
do you have in your office? How did you decide what you wanted? And then has that evolved? Was it like, oh, I did
Mhm.
this and that put me down a specific lane?
Yep. So here was my thought process. So I actually started off with radio frequency, not for dry eye, not for aesthetics. I actually bought it because I was going to do surgical procedures. And the hand pieces that you get with that device, you can use it to make cuts. It will do coagulation. So I wanted it for lumps and bumps. And then I was looking at it and I was like, well, what are these other hand pieces? And they're like, oh, that's for aesthetics. It tightens skin. And I was like, okay. And so I started like looking at patients and thinking about it. And I was like, man, I have a lot of patients with lumps and bumps. I have way more patients that have wrinkles. And I have a fair number that have dry eye. So I wound up with radio frequency initially because I can use it on every skin type. So it's an energy that we say is colorblind because the chromophore it's going after is water. And when you're looking at any of these energy-based devices, the things that you really need to know is what's the target chromophore that it's going after? How do I know when I get there? What are my clinical endpoints? And then what's going to be the result of that that I can expect, and how do I marry these blends together? So radio frequency is targeting water, and you can use it on any skin type because we're not targeting anything but that. So it's colorblind. So that's why I started with it, because then I could use it on every patient. So quickly I got it and I was like, okay, great, we're off to the races here. And my advice to you would be start with just one. I would start with the cosmetic conversation, build your systems, do that, and then figure out what device is going to work best, and only do one until you get your protocols down, because it's a heavy investment. I like to do things the hard way. And so I decided to do neurotoxin, RF, and IPL within 6 months of each other. And I about killed myself and my staff. So I don't advise that. Oh, and I learned how to do scleral lenses. I didn't fit a contact lens in 15 years because I've been in ophthalmology, and decided to do that at the same time. That is not how I would advise anyone to do anything. Please learn from my mistakes. So the next thing that came very quickly was IPL, because I had so many patients with ocular rosacea. And when you start looking for telangiectatic vessels, you're going to see them everywhere. And those telangiectatic vessels that are part of ocular rosacea are leaking inflammation, and they're causing problems. And when I can help a patient with dry eye, I can also help them with their skin and how it looks. So IPL is targeting two different chromophores, melanin and oxyhemoglobin. And now you can see why RF and IPL work together so beautifully, because now you're hitting three: water, oxyhemoglobin, and melanin. That's how you're starting to put all this together. So I love the two together, and you can do those in the same setting if you wanted to. You can start with IPL and then do RF right behind it. You never want to do RF first, because when you do RF, you create a bunch of hyperemia and redness, and you're going to overtreat somebody with IPL because that's a target for IPL, right? So once you understand the science, then you can start to put these things together. And then neurotoxin, again, came along at the exact same time, because I wanted patients to kind of get that wow effect, if you will, because neurotoxin works in 2 weeks. RF and IPL take a little bit longer. I mean, IPL, yes, you'll get that like nice glow when you're doing a photofacial, and you can get blood vessels, the bigger blood vessels in just like that with a click of a button. But the ocular surface takes a little bit longer. And if you're doing pigment, it can take a few treatments, because you're going to have to get deeper and deeper with the pigment. So neurotoxin for me has always been like my kind of wow, and it cleans up anything that I can't get with RF. So and then I started doing laser resurfacing about 2 years ago, which has been a really good fit, because most of our dermatology colleagues do not like to put in metal corneal shields and get anywhere near the eyelids. And this crepey skin underneath the eye, around the eye, and this brow area is responds beautifully to laser resurfacing, but nobody wants to do it, but I'll do it all day long because we have that skill set. So that's how that's like come into all the things and putting it all together. And then I recently just got dynamic muscle stimulation with RF with microneedling. So it's microneedling, but every time you punch that needle through the skin, you're utilizing radio frequency, which does two things. You're giving energy and it helps coagulate the blood vessels, so it's a cleaner field. So there's lots of ways that you can manage patients and put all this together that, again, blur the lines, but you're helping with dry eye, you're helping the skin around the eyelids that's very delicate that nobody else really wants to mess with. There's a million reasons to do this.
I'm going to pause because I want to ask business questions, and there are doctors on the call who might be like, stop asking about how she cash flows this. So are there any technical questions before I start asking some business questions? I'm going to give them a second.
Yep.
My questions, my first question is going to be, you talked a little bit about your schedule when we first started, and you talked about the idea that you're doing IPL and RF, a big chunk of your Monday. You're doing, how did that start from a business perspective? I would tell you half of the dry eye conversations we have are like, I don't know how to get into this. I really want to get off of insurance and get more towards dry eye treatment or sclerals or myopia, something. But
Sure.
How did you start your practice so that you had these kind of treatment protocols as a big chunk? Like, I'm assuming you didn't just go, all right, from the beginning, we're going to do dry eye, but maybe you did. How did it start? How did you get to where you are?
I got really good at doing a questionnaire, point of care testing, and prescribing. So I had that down pat. I knew exactly what the patient needed when they needed it, how they were going to respond to the most part. So that system was built before I ever even considered adding a device or an in-office procedure. So that's step one. And then once you get that, then
Can I pause and ask I want to ask a question into that. So you built your questionnaire. So what did your patient profile look like at that point? So one of the things, go ahead.
Go ahead. Ask your question first.
I was just going to say, one of the things that you mentioned earlier was you sort of assume that people have dry eye from the beginning. They have to prove they don't. Did that start at that point? Or is that something that as you got a little further down, you were like, hey, everybody pretty much is walking in with this unless they're not?
No, I've believed that for 20 years.
Okay.
So yeah, I learned that long ago before it was cool to be in dry eye. And everything, but it is the foundation, because everything I've done behind that is because I have that belief. And so it didn't come later. That was actually first. You have to really believe. Like, one thing that I would tell people to not do this for is because you think you can make a lot of money at it. And yes, it's cash-based procedures, and it does reimburse, like, from a standpoint, well, but there's a lot of capital investment here. You have to believe in what you're doing, and you have to want to help these people who have not been able to be helped by anyone else. And there's a lot of like psychological pieces to that too. I do it because I love it, and it rewards me and it rewards the patient. But I would be remiss if I didn't say that please don't get into this because it's cash based and it looks like it can be a really good cost center. You'll be miserable if you try to do it that way. So that's why I say that foundation for me was, I believe every patient has it until they don't. And I've seen the worst of the worst. And my goal in life is for none of my patients or anyone to ever get to that point where we've gone past the point of no return. And when you look at dry eye as a journey, I always imagine, like, man, where would this patient be if I had gotten to them 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 1 year ago? And now we're starting to see this in children because of devices. And so it's really more about visual hygiene as a whole. And this just happens to be my specialty. But that's a really important piece to this. So mindset, and then do your questionnaire, build those systems first before you ever do a capital investment. And then your first capital investment should be something small, like a Rinsada, like a microblepharoexfoliation, or like a zest treatment, or what you guys are doing. It should be something that doesn't have you have enough skin in the game that you're gonna make changes, but it needs to be, do I love this, and can I actually implement something? Because if you can't, let's learn on the $2,000 investment, maybe not the $150,000 investment.
We did get a question. What laser resurfacing does she use?
Yeah, so I have a Cynosure Icon, and it has a Max G IPL handpiece. I have a 1540 handpiece. That's my non-ablative laser. And then I have a 2940 ablative handpiece.
All right, we're gonna make one more shift. So if you have questions, now is the time, because we got about 3-4 minutes. My last shift is, can you talk about compliance challenges in your office? So I would go ahead. You're ready. So I'm just gonna let you go.
Ready.
We want to hear from you, not me. So
I know because I think the biggest thing is you have to bring people back. And I would set up your protocols so that it looks exactly like your glaucoma clinic does. A dry eye patient that's been diagnosed with dry eye never goes more than 6 months. But if I implement something new, they're coming back in 4 weeks. So they get diagnosed, they have dry eye, they have meibomian gland dysfunction, whatever it is, they're coming back in 4 weeks to see, did they do what I asked them to do? If they did, great. Let's see how it's working and what do we need to modify. And then if that's okay, they come back in 8 to 12 weeks. If they're doing great at that point, then they're coming back in 4 to 6 months, depending on the patient, but never longer than 6 months. I have everything written out, instructions. So I have an 8x11 sheet that has, I don't know, 20 probably little boxes of all the things: lid hygiene, drink your water, turn the ceiling fan off, all the drops, all the procedures, so that for that patient, they have something in their hand, not going, man, what did she say? She gave me like 10 things. I don't remember any of them. So now I'm not going to do anything. I do that for 2 reasons. 1, so the patient remembers, and 2, to give people hope. Because when there's 2 or 3 things checked, I show them, I'm like, look, there's all these other things. We're going to start here, but I need you to know that if we don't reach the level that we need to with these, I have all these other things in my arsenal. So those 2 things are really important from a compliance standpoint. You're still always going to have those people that come in, and they come in at 4 weeks, and I gave them, lid hygiene, a hot compress, please take this nutraceutical and whatever it is. And they're like, I didn't do any of those things. Okay, well, let's have a conversation. That happens. That's human nature. We're changing human behavior, the most difficult thing on the planet. And my favorite book, if you so desire, is The Power of Habit. It's up on my shelf back here. Charles Duhigg. When you want to teach habits, you have to do a cue. You have to you have to find the why, and you have to give people a reason, and then you have to find a cue so that they're triggered to change the new behavior. And that works just for us too, by the way. Once you kind of do that and you don't get frustrated because they haven't done something, then put systems in so that it helps with whatever. Ask the patient, well, tell me more. Why? Was it too hard? Was it overcomplicated? Like, tell me more. No, I just forgot. I had a patient today. He's like, and he's young. He has drusen. I was like, listen, you have got to take this nutritional supplement and wear your sunglasses. He comes back in 6 months and he's like, I still have all 3 bottles. I didn't take any of them. And I was like, Mike, what are you doing? And then this time I was like, okay, is this conversation different? And he's like, yes, I took everything. I've got it into my system. I figured out a better habit. It's working. So you just have to be patient with people and make sure you give them tools. Most importantly, you got to give them the why.
That's great. I think that's a good place for us to sort of leave this conversation. You are awesome.
Thank you.
I wanted to thank you for, I love these conversations because we get to hear sort of doctors unplugged talking about the things that you're passionate about. And it was great to hear about aesthetics, cosmetics, dry eye, like just all sorts of interesting things. So I promise you we'd be out of here by 7 o'clock. It is 3 minutes to 7. And so we
Good
are
job.
out of here. I wanted to thank everyone for attending. Again, I'm Tom Chapman with Peeq Pro. Our guest tonight has been Dr. Selina McGee. She's out of Oklahoma. And we would love to continue this conversation into the future. I will be sending out some links and things of that nature. But understand this is important to our company in terms of cosmetics and things of that nature. So with that, I'll just say goodbye. Thank you. Farewell.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining. Thanks, Thomas, for having me.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.